A pregnant 18-year-old named Savannah Soto was reported missing on December 22, 2023, and was last seen in a gray Kia Optima just days before Christmas. Reports later stated that her boyfriend, Matthew Guerra, had also been missing. The families of the two were shocked to find out what had happened to the young parents-to-be.
There isn't a dry eye at this Northwest Side apartment complex.
It's a Merry Christmas, but it's not too merry for us right now.
Emotions are raw as several look in the direction of Savannah Soto's apartment. Everyone here, including her grandmother Rachel, hoping for any clue on her location.
We're entitled to know something about her. We love her, we miss her, whatever's going on. Let her come home so we can have a Merry Christmas with her.
Savannah Soto should have been walking through the hospital doors that morning with a nervous smile, one hand resting on her stomach and the other clutching the small hospital bag she had packed days earlier. It was only a few days before Christmas, and instead of wrapping presents or decorating a tree, her family was preparing to welcome a new life into the world. Doctors were expecting Savannah. Her family was expecting Savannah. But as the minutes slowly passed, something didn't feel right. Her chair remained empty. At first, nobody panicked. Traffic could be unpredictable. Maybe she had stopped for gas. Maybe she was running a little late. These things happen every day. Someone picked up a phone. They called Savannah. It rang. Then went to voicemail. They called again. Voicemail. Another family member tried. Nothing. They reached out to her boyfriend, Matthew Guerra. His phone wasn't answering either. Now the excitement inside that waiting room began to dissolve into confusion. Where were they? No message. No explanation. No indication that anything had gone wrong. Hours passed. The family could no longer convince themselves this was simply a delay. Something was wrong. Very wrong. As concern grew, relatives began calling friends. They contacted anyone who might have seen the young couple. Every unanswered call made the silence feel heavier. Savannah wasn't the kind of person who would simply disappear, especially not on the day she was supposed to give birth. An 18-year-old expectant mother doesn't miss her own labor appointment without a reason. Soon, what began as worried phone calls turned into a missing persons investigation. Police started searching. Detectives began asking questions. Friends were interviewed. Neighbors looked out their windows. Every passing hour made finding Savannah and Matthew more urgent. Because there wasn't just one life at stake anymore. There were three. If you're watching this and you enjoy in-depth true crime documentaries that focus on the facts, the investigation, and the victims' stories, take a moment to subscribe. It really helps the channel, and it ensures you don't miss future cases just like this one. As investigators worked to piece together the couple's last known movements, hope slowly began to fade. Then, a police dispatcher received a call. An abandoned vehicle had been located. The description matched the car detectives had been searching for. Officers immediately responded. Police radios crackled with urgency as units converged on a quiet apartment complex parking lot. No one at that moment knew exactly what they were about to find. Patrol cars rolled in. Yellow crime scene tape soon followed. Officers approached cautiously. The windows were dark. From outside, it was difficult to see inside the vehicle. One officer shined a flashlight through the glass. He immediately stepped back. The tone over the radio changed. Within moments, additional investigators were requested. The parking lot became eerily silent. Then came the words that would forever change this investigation. "We've located the missing vehicle." A brief pause. "There are two bodies inside." The search was over, but the nightmare had only just begun. The missing pregnant woman had been found dead. News of the discovery spread quickly, but very few details were released. Detectives knew they were dealing with more than a missing persons case. The scene inside the vehicle suggested that whatever had happened had occurred hours earlier, and every minute that passed made preserving evidence even more critical. Before investigators could explain how Savannah and Matthew ended up inside that car, they first needed to understand who Savannah was. She was only 18 years old. Friends described her as excited, hopeful, and completely focused on becoming a mother. Her pregnancy had become the center of her life. Like many young parents, she spent countless hours imagining the future she wanted for her child. Family members recalled conversations about baby clothes, diapers, and late-night feedings. They remembered how she smiled whenever someone asked about the baby. Although preparing for motherhood came with challenges, she appeared determined to provide her son with a loving home. The apartment reflected those dreams. A nursery had already begun to take shape. Tiny outfits hung neatly in the closet. Baby blankets were folded carefully. Essential supplies had been collected one item at a time. Every corner of the room pointed toward an arrival that everyone believed was only days away. Instead of planning holiday celebrations, the family had been counting down the days until they could finally hold the newest member of their family. The baby's name had already been chosen. It was no longer an idea or a distant hope. To everyone close to Savannah, he was already part of the family. Those plans would never become reality. Looking back, relatives searched for signs that something had been wrong. They replayed conversations repeatedly, wondering if they had missed a warning or overlooked a plea for help. Nothing seemed unusual enough to predict what was about to happen. No one imagined that within days, police would be searching for her. Investigators shifted their attention to the final days before Savannah disappeared. The last confirmed contact placed both Savannah and Matthew together on December 21st. After that, communication suddenly stopped. Messages went unanswered. Calls were ignored. The silence continued throughout the following day. When Savannah failed to appear for her scheduled induction appointment, concern quickly turned into alarm. Hospitals are accustomed to patients arriving late or rescheduling appointments, but this situation felt different. She had been preparing for this day. There was no indication she intended to miss it. Family members immediately began trying every possible way to reach her. Nothing. Matthew's phone was equally silent. Because neither of them could be located, officers conducted a welfare check at the apartment where the couple had been staying. From the outside, the residence appeared quiet. There was no activity, no vehicles outside, no response after repeated knocks. When officers looked more closely, they noticed damage around the door. It wasn't immediately clear how it had happened, but investigators documented everything. Once inside, detectives expected to find signs explaining where the couple had gone. Instead, they found something unexpected. The apartment was remarkably clean. Nothing appeared overturned. Furniture remained in place. The nursery looked untouched. There were no obvious indications of a violent struggle. Yet the two people who lived there had vanished without explanation. To experienced investigators, scenes like this can be misleading. Sometimes an absence of disorder means nothing at all. Other times, it suggests someone intentionally cleaned or staged the environment after a crime. At that stage, detectives refused to jump to conclusions. They needed evidence, not assumptions. One question continued to dominate the investigation. Did Savannah leave voluntarily, or had something already gone terribly wrong inside that apartment? As detectives interviewed relatives, another part of Savannah's life began to emerge. Family members described a relationship that had experienced serious difficulties. They explained that Savannah and Matthew had broken up and reconciled more than once. Like many complicated relationships, periods of calm were often followed by conflict. Investigators also learned that there had been previous allegations of domestic violence. Court records showed that a protective order had once been sought. Although relationships can improve over time, detectives knew this history could not be ignored. Cases involving intimate partners often require investigators to examine every previous incident, no matter how old. Neighbors added another piece to the puzzle. Some recalled hearing heated arguments from the apartment on different occasions. While none of them witnessed violence firsthand during the days leading up to the disappearance, several remembered tense exchanges that stood out in hindsight. Family members admitted they had worried about Savannah returning to Matthew after earlier conflicts. Like many loved ones in similar situations, they hoped things had changed. Now, detectives wondered whether those earlier concerns were connected to the couple's disappearance. At this stage, Matthew naturally became a central focus of the investigation. That did not mean he was responsible for Savannah's death, but investigators had to examine every possibility based on the information available. Finding him became just as important as finding Savannah. If he was alive, he might know exactly what had happened. If he wasn't, the investigation could take an entirely different direction. Detectives believed the missing boyfriend might hold the key to solving the case. Then everything changed. A tip led investigators to a Kia parked at an apartment complex. The vehicle matched the description officers had been searching for. Police secured the area immediately. Witnesses watched from a distance as investigators approached cautiously. To shield the scene from public view, large sheets were raised around the car. Officers spoke quietly among themselves. No one wanted to reveal what they had found until every detail had been carefully documented. Family members who arrived near the scene were kept back. They desperately searched the faces of investigators, hoping someone would offer reassurance. None came. As crime scene technicians examined the vehicle, the heartbreaking reality became impossible to hide. Savannah was sitting in the front passenger seat. She had suffered a fatal gunshot wound. Matthew was found in the back seat. He had also been shot. The unborn baby could not be saved. Within moments, what had begun as a missing persons investigation became a triple homicide investigation, involving a young mother, her unborn son, and the young man found alongside her. At first glance, investigators believed they already understood what had happened. The circumstances appeared straightforward. Detectives looked at the couple's history. They considered the previous reports of domestic violence, the protective order, and the fact that both victims had been found together inside the same vehicle. An early theory quickly formed. Perhaps Matthew had shot Savannah before turning the gun on himself. Unfortunately, cases involving domestic violence sometimes end in exactly that way. Investigators had seen similar tragedies before, and the evidence available during those first hours seemed to point in that direction. But experienced detectives know that first impressions can be dangerously misleading. Every crime scene tells a story. The challenge is determining whether that story is genuine or whether someone has carefully rewritten it. As forensic specialists continued processing the Kia, details began to emerge that refused to fit the original theory. The first issue was impossible to ignore. There was no firearm. If Matthew had taken his own life, where was the weapon? Investigators searched the vehicle thoroughly. They examined beneath the seats, inside every compartment, around the surrounding area. Nothing. The gun simply wasn't there. That discovery immediately weakened the murder-suicide theory. Then forensic analysts noticed something else. The blood inside the vehicle wasn't distributed the way they expected. Some stains appeared in locations that suggested movement after the shootings, rather than immediately following them. Investigators documented every droplet, every smear, and every transfer mark. Each one represented another piece of a much larger puzzle. Matthew's position inside the back seat also raised concerns. According to crime scene specialists, his body rested in a way that seemed inconsistent with someone collapsing naturally after being shot. There were subtle indicators that he may have been repositioned. Detectives became increasingly convinced that the scene had been altered before the vehicle was abandoned. If that was true, then someone else had remained with the victims after the shootings. Someone had enough time to move bodies. Someone had enough time to remove the weapon. Someone had enough time to leave without being seen. The investigation changed overnight. Instead of searching for evidence confirming a murder-suicide, detectives began searching for evidence of a double homicide committed by another person. The question that had once seemed answered suddenly returned with even greater urgency. If Matthew didn't kill Savannah, who killed them both? Investigators expanded the timeline, working backward from the discovery of the vehicle. They collected surveillance footage from nearby businesses, apartment complexes, and traffic cameras. Detectives knew that modern investigations often hinge on a single overlooked camera. Hours of recordings were reviewed. Most of them revealed nothing useful. Cars entered. Cars exited. Residents walked their dogs. Delivery drivers made routine stops. Then one camera captured something that demanded closer attention. Late at night, a pickup truck entered the area. Nothing about the vehicle immediately appeared suspicious. Moments later, Matthew's Kia approached the same location. The footage wasn't perfect, but investigators could clearly see activity between the two vehicles. A man exited the truck. He walked toward the Kia, then he climbed inside. For several minutes, both vehicles disappeared behind part of the apartment complex where the cameras could no longer see them. Those missing moments became the focus of the investigation. What happened out of sight? Detectives continued watching. Only minutes later, the pickup truck reappeared. The Kia also moved. But investigators noticed something unsettling. The movements no longer appeared ordinary. The sequence suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Whoever had been inside those vehicles seemed to know exactly what they were doing. The recordings were analyzed frame by frame. Investigators enhanced images where possible. License plate information eventually provided detectives with the identity of the truck's registered owner. The vehicle was linked to Christopher Preciado. As detectives dug deeper, they also learned that Christopher's father had access to the same truck. The investigation now had its first significant lead. For days, detectives had been asking who else might have been present when Savannah and Matthew died. Now they had names. But identifying a suspect is only the beginning. Proving what happened requires evidence that can withstand scrutiny in court. Investigators needed to determine why Christopher's truck appeared at such a critical moment, what occurred during those unseen minutes behind the building, and whether the footage captured the people responsible for covering up a brutal crime. The answers would soon come from the people who knew far more than they initially admitted. Detectives brought Christopher Preciado in for questioning. By then, investigators had already spent days reviewing surveillance footage, collecting forensic evidence, and comparing witness statements. They weren't walking into the interview looking for guesses. They were looking for explanations that matched the evidence. Christopher agreed to tell his version of events. According to him, the meeting with Matthew had been arranged because of a drug transaction. He claimed the exchange was supposed to be routine. Nothing more, nothing less. Savannah, he said, had simply come along. Christopher told detectives that when they met, Matthew began acting strangely. The conversation quickly became tense. Then, according to his account, Matthew suddenly produced a firearm. Christopher insisted he feared for his life. He claimed a struggle broke out over the weapon. During that struggle, Savannah was accidentally shot. Everything, he said, happened within seconds. He described confusion, panic, shouting. He then claimed the fight continued with Matthew. As they struggled for control of the gun, another shot was fired. Matthew was struck. Christopher portrayed the entire incident as a terrible accident that spiraled out of control. He insisted there had never been a plan to kill anyone. He wasn't trying to rob them. He wasn't trying to execute them. Everything, he claimed, resulted from a confrontation that neither side expected. For a brief moment, his explanation appeared to answer several important questions. It explained why all three people had been together. It explained why both victims had suffered gunshot wounds. It even attempted to account for the absence of witnesses. But experienced investigators rarely evaluate a statement based only on how believable it sounds. They compare every word against physical evidence. If even one important detail cannot be supported, the entire story begins to collapse. Detectives returned to the crime scene photographs. Forensic experts revisited the vehicle. Measurements were taken again. Every blood stain was examined. Every bullet path was carefully reconstructed. Almost immediately, problems began to appear. Christopher's description of where everyone had been standing failed to match the blood evidence inside the vehicle. Several stains appeared in places that should have been impossible if events had unfolded the way he described. Then investigators studied the bullet trajectories. The angles didn't line up with a close-range struggle over a weapon. Instead, they suggested that the victims were positioned differently than Christopher claimed. Another major inconsistency involved Matthew's body. Christopher implied that Matthew had collapsed after being shot during the confrontation. Yet forensic specialists believed the body's final position resulted from being moved after death. There were signs of post-mortem repositioning that could not be ignored. That raised an obvious question. Why would anyone move the body if the shooting had truly been accidental? The inconsistencies continued to grow. Investigators also found blood on parts of the vehicle where it shouldn't have been if Christopher's version were accurate. Evidence recovered from the tire and wheel area suggested activity outside the vehicle after the shootings. That detail pointed toward an effort to transport or reposition the victims, rather than someone fleeing in panic. Each contradiction weakened Christopher's account. Instead of supporting self-defense, the forensic evidence painted a picture of actions taken after the killings. Actions requiring time, deliberation, and cooperation. Detectives reached a troubling conclusion. The physical evidence was telling a completely different story. It suggested the crime scene inside the Kia was not where everything had happened. It suggested someone had worked to conceal the truth before abandoning the vehicle. With those questions still unanswered, investigators obtained another crucial piece of evidence: security cameras from Christopher's own residence. Unlike the parking lot footage, these recordings documented what happened before and after the truck arrived home. Detectives watched carefully. Christopher could be seen returning to the house. His movements appeared hurried. Within moments, other family members came outside. Among them was his father. The footage showed activity centered around the pickup truck. A short time later, the truck left the property again. Investigators paid close attention to its appearance. Based on the video and the vehicle's movement, detectives believed there was significant weight in the truck bed. Later footage captured the truck returning once more. This time, investigators observed what they believed was a noticeable difference. The apparent load was gone. When detectives compared those recordings with the surveillance timeline from the apartment complex, the sequence became increasingly significant. The truck had traveled between locations during the same period investigators believed the victims' bodies had been moved. It was another piece that fit far better with a planned cover-up than with Christopher's description of a spontaneous struggle. The investigation uncovered additional missing property. Savannah's jewelry could not be accounted for. Her purse was missing. Matthew's wallet had also disappeared. Those missing belongings introduced another possible motive. What first appeared to be a confrontation now showed signs of robbery. Investigators also developed evidence indicating that after the killings, the truck returned to the victim's apartment. That discovery suggested whoever was involved wasn't simply trying to escape. They were attempting to remove evidence and conceal what had happened. By now, detectives believed they had reconstructed the sequence with far greater accuracy than the initial theory. The evidence no longer pointed toward murder followed by suicide. It pointed toward two victims whose deaths were followed by an organized effort to hide the crime. As the investigation reached its final stages, detectives believed the evidence had become impossible to ignore. Christopher Preciado was arrested and charged with capital murder in connection with the deaths of Savannah Soto and Matthew Guerra, as well as the death of Savannah's unborn child. Prosecutors alleged that what happened that night was not a tragic accident, but a deliberate crime followed by an extensive effort to conceal the truth. Investigators also arrested Christopher's father. According to authorities, the evidence suggested he helped move and dispose of the victims after the shootings. The focus of the case had expanded beyond the killings themselves to include the alleged cover-up that followed. For the families, however, no arrest could erase what had been lost. Months earlier, they had been preparing for one of the happiest moments of their lives. Instead, they found themselves planning funerals. Savannah's loved ones spoke of a young woman who was excited to become a mother despite the challenges ahead. They remembered her talking about holding her son for the first time, decorating his room, and imagining the future they would build together. Those dreams ended before they ever had the chance to begin. Matthew's family was also left grieving the loss of a son whose life ended alongside Savannah's. Whatever mistakes or struggles had existed during his lifetime, those who loved him were now forced to mourn a future that would never come. And then there was the baby. He never took his first breath. He never opened his eyes. He never had the opportunity to experience birthdays, holidays, school, friendships, or the countless ordinary moments that make up a lifetime. 3 lives were lost in a case that shocked San Antonio and drew national attention just days before Christmas. For investigators, the case became a reminder that early assumptions can be misleading. Had detectives accepted the initial theory without examining every detail, critical evidence might never have been uncovered. It was the surveillance footage, the forensic analysis, and the careful reconstruction of the timeline that ultimately reshaped the investigation. For Savannah's family, the holidays would never feel the same again. Every Christmas would carry the memory of the day they waited in a hospital, expecting to welcome a new member of the family, only to realize that something had gone terribly wrong. The nursery that had once represented hope became a painful reminder of everything that had been taken away. The tiny clothes remained unworn. The blankets stayed neatly folded. The crib that had been prepared with so much love would never cradle the child it had been waiting for. Cases like this also leave difficult questions that extend far beyond one family. They remind us how quickly violence can destroy lives, how important it is to recognize warning signs in troubled relationships, and how every piece of evidence matters when seeking justice. If you've stayed with us until this point, thank you for watching. These stories are never told for entertainment alone. They are told so the victims are remembered, the investigation is understood, and the lessons are not forgotten. If you appreciate carefully researched true crime documentaries, consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who values factual, in-depth coverage. Savannah Soto left home believing she was about to become a mother. Her family expected to meet a newborn baby. Instead, police found her inside a vehicle, her life stolen only days before Christmas. What should have been the beginning of a new chapter became one of San Antonio's most heartbreaking homicide investigations. Long after the crime scene tape was removed and the patrol cars drove away, one image remained impossible to forget: an empty nursery, an ultrasound photograph waiting to become a family keepsake, and a future that vanished before it ever had the chance to begin.